All right. Welcome to the Calm Waves podcast. I'm Dallas Cowan and I'm joined by Tiffany Lewis. It's kind of a part two of what we just did. If you haven't listened to part one, which is us talking about Restore the Last, the nonprofit, and what Tiffany's going to be doing down in El Salvador, please listen to that one as well. But in this one, we're going to talk about really Tiffany. So for people who don't know who you are and maybe jumping into this for the first time, you're one of my favorite stories of what seeing somebody work with the direct neurofeedback and seeing what it can do with neuromodulation. Because what you're doing in El Salvador is, the cutting edge. It's the tip of the spear when it comes to the success of what somebody who takes this direct neurofeedback, takes this type of technology, and just absolutely just uses it. So it's kind of like you can give somebody the analogy sometimes they always say is like you can give somebody a basketball, but LeBron's going to do something different than what I can do with it. And so the direct neurofeedback in your hands has just absolutely changed people's lives. What you've done, you've done 18,000 sessions in 3 years. You have an assembly line process where you can see up to 40 people a day. Like that's just unheard of in the
I
mental
went
health.
a little crazy, I confess.
But you have a method to it, and that's what we're talking about today. It's not just you going, all right, let's just try to put 40 people in a room and do this. So you have a method. I mean, you're trained
I do.
psychologist. You have background in trauma and grief. Like you're not just going. And for one thing, you're not doing it for the money. You're not trying to put 40 people in there
Certainly not.
because it's a profitable business to be able to do it. You're doing it because you're going, okay, here's how I can help the most people in the least amount of time. And so I want you to kind of talk through your method. And because I think when somebody's listening to talking about the direct neurofeedback, it's like a truck. And let's not talk about basketball. It's like a truck. It's like, yes, you can give somebody a truck, but how do you drive it? In what conditions do you do it in? What's the best way to use it? And so that's why I think about with the direct neurofeedback as well. It is a tool, but it needs to have some things around it in order to make it the most effective. If it's sitting on your shelf, it's not going to be as effective. If it's, you're doing it too little, it's not going to be like there are certain things you have to do to it to drive it really, really well. And so I think you drive this really, really well. So I wanted to really kind of talk a lot about your method and how you think about it. We talked about in the previous episode about opening up the window when it comes to EMDR and how it works. So I want you to kind of take us through your process of how how you treat somebody, how you take somebody from, complex trauma or grief, and how do you take them through the process to finding relief.
Yes, you mentioned this, and I had to think about it because I just have fallen into it and hadn't really thought through my process before. But I guess to simplify it, I would say I regulate the nervous system, process the trauma, and then build healthy skills. And I thought, and that's a really oversimplification, like a plumber saying, how they do their job is they turn off the water, they take off the broken parts, and then put new parts in. It summarizes it, sure. It's usually never that clean and straightforward. But if in all of the training of working with trauma and most theories in psychology, you have to regulate, calm people down, and then you can do work. It's like trying to give instructions to a toddler when they're in the middle of a tantrum. They aren't hearing you. So you have to calm that down. And complex trauma takes a lot more effort in regulating the nervous system. You referenced the window of tolerance we talked about before. How far the window is open is the ability to tolerate distress. And you have to tolerate distress to do some hard work. And so the neurofeedback is the best at regulating the nervous system that I've ever experienced. And it's awesome. I used to spend with really complex trauma 6 months to a year helping people to regulate their nervous system to begin to do work. And I was hoping I could cut that in half with neurofeedback. And when I started with it, I realized sometimes I only need a month with something that used to take me a year to get people to regulate their nervous system.
Mm.
So it's been such a joy to work with the direct neurofeedback.
So when you talk about, let's talk about that first step, that regulate step, because that's something that I think we've seen that I think with calm waves and kind of what we're kind of working on is like that regulate first kind of mentality.
Yes,
Did
exactly.
you were you taught that out of school? Like, I mean, because like I think of because I've done therapy before, I've done those types of things before, and I've gone, worked with kids in the foster care system, and I don't think like when I went to my therapist, he never told me like, hey, let's regulate your body first. It was right into, and it was good. But it was all into like your child self content, like what's going on, like I just needed someone to talk to, and kind of a thing. And so I was open, with going through my emotions and everything like that. And it was a really hard time, working at the group home and then with therapy. So I was more of just like letting my emotions go. But he never talked to me about, hey, let's regulate your body first until before we work through some of these things.
Yeah. So I was trained in marriage and family therapist, and about half of the theories have something to start with about um stabilizing the person.
Mm.
And so it's more in theory than the practical physiological regulation that we're talking about here. In my trauma training in EMDR, the basic requirement before I started processing trauma is I was required to see if a client could state change, which is a fancy way of saying, can they change from being stressed to calming themselves down? Do they have the ability
Mm.
to regulate themselves and calm their bodies down? If
Mm.
they don't have that skill, we work on that skill and we don't start the trauma until we have that. So I started with working a couple years at hospice and grief. I was trained in EMDR my second year of working. And then I moved to El Salvador, where almost nothing I was taught worked there. And so I had to reteach myself how to work. And
Tell me
I would
about that.
say,
What roadblocks did you run into?
well, I guess I would summarize. I realized trauma impacts people's capacity to use their imagination. And it was years before I actually found that in a book. It was in Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. In the first chapter, there's a paragraph and a half after he talks about Rorschach tests, and it talks about the imagination being impact, and that changes everything. And I had spent 2 years investigating this and digging deep into it, and that's when I realized, oh my gosh, he put 2 years of my investigation into a paragraph. What is in this book that I am not catching?
Mhm.
um, but I realized, um, with some stories about what was going on at the children's home with the kids and with their families, that they couldn't use their imagination. And when I was at hospice, I was assigned to a family from the Middle East, and I had a translator. And she was helping me work with a young girl, and I was really struggling. It was probably one of the hardest cases I've worked on with that family, and it was quite challenging. So after leaving a difficult session, I was talking to the translator, who was a college student, and I just said, help me understand this culture. What can I do better? How can I reach this girl? And she told me that my imagination based tools were really difficult for someone from her country. And I can't remember now if it was Iran or Iraq that the family was from. I think they were from Iraq. And she said, when I moved to the United States in elementary school, it was so hard for me to adjust because in my culture, we don't use our imagination. And
Sure.
I accepted what she told me, that it was a cultural difference. But then I get to El Salvador, where trauma is everywhere, and they're having the same problem of inability to use their imagination. And I went, what if it wasn't a cultural thing? What if it's the trauma?
Mm.
And I was able to find in some books about complex trauma some descriptions of changes physiological in the brain that describe the creation of black and white thinking and the inability to have flexibility of thought. And I thought that was the closest I found to
Mhm.
really describe it before reading The Body Keeps the Score. But it makes sense on a practical level, because if you think of a kid being scared of the dark, why are they scared of the dark? They're scared of everything their brain is imagining. So if you want to stop being scared, how do you do it? You shut off the imagination. And so I think it happens as a practical defense mechanism. And I think there's also something God created in our brains naturally to protect people that
Mhm.
shuts that off, so they don't become just overwhelmed
Mhm.
with everything in the trauma and really scary things. I mean, if your country's at war and you're hearing bombs at night, you're never going to be able to calm it down. And so your brain shuts off your imagination.
Question about that, because I think of more stateside, more of like kids out of the foster care system. They have that trauma and they're not able to process it. Does that affect their like imagination of what they could be? Like their, future state? Because it's like you have a kid grows up, I want to be a fireman. And he's imagining being a fireman and doing it. And he's got these goals, to put it, because he can imagine. A part of like a peak performance or like is visualization. Visualize yourself on the field, doing this thing, hitting this ball or whatever it is. So I just can't imagine that being taken away. And so is that a part of it? I know, again, this isn't research driven.
Yes. And I'm not saying no one with trauma can use their imaginations. There's some that completely fall into that and have
Yeah.
astounding imaginations, but in general, it's shut off.
Yeah.
I would go to answer your question. It's more of there was one um, girl at the children's home who turned 18, moved. They have a transition home for those who still want to continue with their education or work training. And so I'm guessing she was maybe 20.
Mhm.
And a team came to help and volunteer, and they brought some candy, and she got some candy, and somehow she ended up with a pound of chocolate. And she made herself sick because she ate it all within a day and a half. And I really put some thought in that. This is not someone with an eating disorder. This isn't anything like that. But it's the same problem in developing world countries, third world countries, where people can't save money. When you have a hope like that, you have something to lose. What are the options that it's going to get taken away, getting stolen? When you are
Mhm.
so defeated in everything, if I don't eat it now, then I'm probably going to lose it. Clients with really complex trauma, I learned years ago after working on healing a lot of trauma, doing a lot of work. I said to one client, I think we might even be able to start thinking about being happy soon. And I sent her into a panic attack. That was the most terrifying thing to her. There's real vulnerability in being happy and having hope. And
Mhm.
so it's a big defensive mechanism to protect yourself. If I have a dream of becoming a fireman, if I have that hope, now I'm vulnerable and I can be really hurt.
Wow. So continuing with like the method of it, because I think this is so good. I think it's such a great thing of like so many nuggets about even your own life, or how do you, and it's, The Body Keeps the Score is such a great book, because I think it helps give empathy to people that have had trauma. Well, why can't they do that? Why can't they process this? Why can't they act like this? And so I think when you are able to empathize with it and understand that some of their hardwire is just not correct, or like, someone who's grew up in a home that was much more loving or whatever that looks like, or circumstances. I think that's so helpful, because I think you like the requirements are kind of lower, I guess, lowering the bar to go, hey, we got to lower the bar a little bit so that they can, kind of build back up. We can't just give them this opportunity and be like, hey, we're going to give this opportunity to do this big thing. And they're like, no, thank you. I mean, self-sabotage was a huge thing that we saw at the group home.
Yes,
Was
it is.
you're just about to graduate into this new phase and they get into a fight. Or they, literally we had a girl who was put out into a alternative school because she got into a fight, and she worked really, really hard to do her grades, do everything like that, 9 to 5, and day before got into a fight.
Sabotage and all. Yep.
And you're like, what the heck? What's going on? And it's this like, I'm going to go into this new phase, but I don't know how to communicate it, that I'm scared. So I'm going to do the one thing that I know that's going to keep me here, get into a fight.
Well, and I think it's another element that complicates it is there's a lot of trauma that the negative beliefs we talked about in the last one about how trauma is literally stuck in your amygdala, which creates a meaning. And sometimes the meaning was true at the time of the event, sometimes it was not, but you can't make yourself stop believing it. And sometimes a trauma comes after something happy happened. And so there's a sabotaging belief, if I feel good, bad things happen. So sometimes there's actually a fear of good things happening. I mentioned my training for EMDR was I had to make sure someone could change to be calm before we could process. Well, my second or third client I ever worked with in EMDR couldn't hold a calm state. She could hold it for about 10 seconds, and then catastrophe struck it and destroyed it. And she couldn't maintain it. And I spent about 2 months working with her. And the facility I was working at was closing down. So I was trying to refer her to an EMDR therapist. And she's like, well, I haven't even processed it. I don't even know if I want EMDR. Can we try it? And I was a little nervous, but I thought she'd worked hard. She had now been able to hold the calm state for 30 seconds. And I said, well, let's pick something, on a level 0 to 10. Let's pick something 3. I knew it would go up to 7, but I thought maybe we could prevent a 10 if we started at 2 or 3. And the next week, we processed with EMDR a trauma. And I learned more about her in those 10 minutes we processed than the whole 6 months I had worked with her before. And what I learned was when her dad was physically abusive, and when she was safe, he was hurting someone else. And so for her, the belief of when I feel good, someone I love is being hurt. And so I realized I couldn't create a calm state until we worked in the trauma. So sometimes with complex trauma, you have to go back and forth and do this little dance of calming and regulating and then working, because they will never regulate if you don't process the trauma. I worked with someone else, and I won't go into detail, in El Salvador, but there was in a park a gang rape, we'll say. And we processed this whole thing. And then at the end, as she went through the memory through EMDR, she was leaving the park and she saw kids playing on the playground. And she said to herself, well, this happened to me, at least it protected the kids.
Rationalizing.
And so she carried for life this belief, if I feel good, then someone else is in danger. I have to sabotage myself or someone else is in danger. Didn't make sense, but it was stuck in her amygdala, and you can't logic your way out of it. And so sometimes the trauma is actually keeping people in these sabotaging beliefs because their brain has got, as you mentioned, those hard wires crossed, and it said something safe is harmful. And their brains learn how to sabotage it in a protective measure.
I keep getting the movie Inside Out in my head. How they have the little like balls that kind of roll through, and it's a memory, and it's like core memory, and it's all different colors, and then you have to process it, and then the imagination friends down at the bottom. Anyway, so like there you got the whole process, which I think is really great. But I keep thinking about, they didn't have somebody that would have trauma. of having the stuck, and we talked about it before, and I think it was a good analogy that you said, talking about like digesting. Like you digest things, you digest memories. And that's why sleep is so good. That's why rest is so good, because you're digesting all what happened that day and you're doing a new day and all these different things. But yeah, I just think of that stuck state of a giant ball that's just there and it's stuck. And what you're doing with EMDR or the direct neurofeedback, or like the whole process is trying to unstick whatever that monument ball is, that trauma ball that's stuck in there. So again, so you got regulate first, and that's kind of like, not regulate, like you're trying to regulate, you're trying to go back and forth sometimes, regulate so you can process. Tell me about like the next.
Well, I would say it's different for complex trauma than just a one event trauma, or even someone with a lot of trauma, but it's not developmental complex trauma.
Mhm.
My favorite process is, as I've been mentioning, is EMDR. I think when you look at all the trauma processes, there's a real similarity with it. It might be with the questions, it asks something rational and logical, and then it puts an emotion with it or an image with it. So you're basically going from your left hemisphere to your right, back and forth. It's doing a manual bilateral stimulation, where with EMDR, it does a physiological bilateral stimulation.
Interesting.
The eye movement creates bilateral stimulation. My favorite way is I have tappers that vibrate in your hands, and they vibrate one and then the other. I don't know, 30-50% of the people, when they're holding those and their eyes are closed, their eyes are doing the rapid eye movement while they process.
Really? I was wondering
In
the
fact,
difference
that's
between that.
how I measure when they're in the middle of processing. The formal technique is to count so many times back and forth in the process, but I watch their bodies. And if their eyes are moving, they're going fast. And then when they get through something hard, they start slowing. And when they slow, I give them a couple seconds of the slow, and then I pause it and I say, "What'd you notice?" And yeah, or their leg might be tapping the whole time, and then their leg will slow down and pause. And I'll know it's a good time they got through something, and it's a good time to pause and ask what happened. So I use the body in EMDR to tell me what's going on. So I forgot the original question you were
No,
starting
that's
with
great.
before
I
I
mean,
got
it
in
was
down
kind of
that
like,
rabbit trail.
as you're going through, I mean, you do the direct neurofeedback that kind of helps regulate, that helps you get, to where you need to go, where, they need to be in a calm-ish state in order to be able to process that trauma. So rather than it taking, 12 months to get to that place, you're like, hey, I can do this in a month. I can teach them how to regulate, first in that. And then I can do the EMDR where you're processing that. As you said before, in the previous episode, you just talked about drinking water. The memory is like a lodged something in their
Mhm.
throat. EMDR is the cool drink of water to be able to help it but process now. Yeah. So I think it's kind of the
Yeah, okay.
next thing.
So I'd say for when people are triggered with a trauma, there's this impulsive reaction of how their brain responds. And most therapies teach them when that trigger comes, how to manage it and control it. But it doesn't stop the trigger. But EMDR, when you process the trauma, the trigger doesn't come. But sometimes those habits are still there because they've had a lifetime of
Oh.
habit. So after the trauma is processed, some of those habits come in, or they've never learned good skills. And so we have to teach, well, how do you shift this skill? How do you learn how to think different? If you aren't going to worry all day, if worrying and thinking about all the possibilities and preparing for disaster has been where your thoughts have gone all day, well, you don't have to do anymore. But what are you going to fill your daily thoughts with instead? You've got to replace it with something. If you fight with the people closest to you all the time and that's your regular interaction, how do you learn how to interact different? How do you teach people you're going to be interacting with them differently? So then you have to build the skills to change their daily habits, add some healthy skills once that impulse of that trauma and how they instinctively respond is gone.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I think it's you're. I mean, I remember my dad talking about doing the direct neurofeedback with somebody, and excuse me, and they were like, "My anxiety's gone." So I was like, "Do you like it?" She's like, "I don't know. I've never lived without it." It's that kind of question of like, well, maybe I do. Or even there was who was it? It was like a police officer. Like, hey, this is going to relax you. This is going to do. And he was an active guy. And he was like, I kind of like myself with a little bit of anxiety. Like, is this going to take my edge off of, going around the corner or whatever that looks like. So, it's interesting as, we see it as a negative, but someone's like, I kind of want to live with this, but how do you replace it with something that's more healthy?
Yeah, and sometimes I get complaints and it's inconvenient, You get someone who's practically a bodybuilder because they're so angry they have to work out intensely hours a day. Well, now the anger's gone, and it's like, "Oh, I have to actually use self-control and force myself to go work out." And it's not as heavily intensive. I don't need the punching bag for 2 hours in order to get all of this stress out of my body. And it's like, well, you either learn self-control or you vary it up. Maybe you don't need the aerobic workout so much. Maybe you do something else. Sometimes it's a shift like that. I think one of my favorite comments was one of my favorite complaints. I had a client who was very dissociative, came into my office one day and said, "You stole my superpower." And I said, "I'm sorry." And she loved getting tattoos, and she could block out the pain completely and didn't feel any of it. And when she started processing and healing, she didn't dissociate as much, which made a lot of things in life easier, but she couldn't block out the pain the same way. And she had to learn how to manage pain. But yeah, she came in complaining that I stole her superpower.
That's amazing. I mean, I think, yeah, you see these. I mean, I remember I did a direct neurofeedback session a little while ago, probably about 2 months ago. And I hadn't done one in a while. And I remember the next day I was kind of like, we'll see what happens today. Like I was
Yeah,
just so usually like, hey, let's go. We got to get these things done today. And I'm like, nah,
we're good.
we'll get to them. That's okay.
Yeah.
Like did my anxiety, you have to kind of like, okay, how do I, manage, those types of things of, if you wake up with, a bear chasing you all the time, you're going to get you can get a lot of things done.
Yeah.
And then once you go, oh, we just eliminated that bear, you go, still want to get things done. But how do you do it without a bear chasing you?
Yes, and so I had someone last week, couple weeks ago, with ADHD ask me about it, and he basically said, "Will it take away my superpower?" He didn't put it in
Yeah.
that phrase, but he has the ability to super focus with his ADHD. And he's gotten a work project that used to take people 3 months done that he could get it done in 2 weeks when his boss kicks everyone out, says, "Don't disturb him." He's in the zone, and he loves that zone, that flow. And I was like, "Well, I don't think it will steal that from you, but, do it when you've got a few days off work, see if it wears off, and see how it goes. It won't stick forever with one session."
What was the result of it?
He hasn't done it yet. His wife is a big proponent of neurofeedback, and he's considering. And I just said, time it well. I said, it's not going to steal that capacity from you. You have that within you. You've trained your brain how to do it,
What
but you may not be able to do it
what's
2 hours after a
what's
session
the
or the next day after a session.
why does his wife want him to do it? What's the negative effect of this?
Of the ADHD, typical ADHD
Okay.
of struggles with memory, motivation to start something, um, just lost in the tasks.
Yeah. I mean that's the trade-off of it is, you have productivity, but you're hurting other people around you or, yourself.
Yeah. Well, and
Mhm.
it's productivity in the moment. My brother has ADHD and he accomplishes amazing things. I wondered once how he was in law school and working 2 full-time jobs at the same time. And then when I went to visit him and he's at one job on the computer, it was his home office. He's on his computer coding over here, and there's a conference call from the other job from the speaker in the middle of his desk, and he's in the middle of coding, and he interrupts the meeting, corrects whatever's going on, and keeps on coding. And I'm like, oh, that's how he does it. But I can remember as a kid, if he was 5 feet away from the TV, I could stand in between him and the TV where half the screen was blocked, and it would take me 10 minutes to get his attention because he's hyper focused. He wouldn't know I was there.
Mm,
So it's also a hard thing because
mhm,
he shuts people out of his world.
mhm, mhm.
But he's brilliant.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah. Wow. Well, I think as we kind of like wrap this up, I appreciate all of the insight you gave of kind of your story of going, okay, regulate, process that trauma, and then also fill the gaps. And that's what kind of what I heard is just, yeah, being able to just help somebody through that process, and the ultimate goal is to help them to be more healthy, and whatever that mental health looks like. Mental health is a huge component. It's mental health month. May is mental health month. I didn't know that until like 2 weeks ago. And people want to declare that, hey, we need to do something about it, but people are going, what do we do about it? And that's the big thing is, everyone is so complex and in the way that they just handle it. And so I think what you're doing is amazing, and I think your method is awesome, and you can do it at scale. To scale enough. I mean, 40 people a day is pretty good. So it's better than most typical therapists see, 6, maybe 8 on a really hard day. So the fact that you're able to do 40 in a day is
Well,
amazing.
and now that your organization has so kindly donated a device to
Okay.
El Salvador, and I'll take mine. We'll see what I can do with 2 devices. Maybe it'll go up to 70 or 80 a
Yeah,
day.
no,
Who knows?
I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens there. I mean, I think there's a lot of people moving forward into this world, and I think with what I'm really excited about is just using these devices to go alongside with what's already being done, because I think the next generation of therapists will hopefully be using these devices along with their method, because I think it helps them be a better therapist long term, because it helps their patient. It helps their, I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is to help their patient, and so, or their client, and see.
Yeah, the neurofeedback helps everything else become more efficient.
Yeah, I mean,
People
it's,
progress in regular therapy when they're doing the direct neurofeedback.
yeah, I think of like, yeah, just the efficiency of, building something. If you're more efficient at something, it just helps everybody, all across the board. Whether you're a therapist, whether you're a patient, whether you're, in a, yeah, it just opens up so many doors, to have efficiency, to be a part of it. So, well, thank you, Tiffany. Thank you for your time. I'm just so excited to see what this journey kind of takes as you step into this, and you're going to El Salvador here soon. But just thank you for your time and just sharing your method and what you get to do every day and how you just want to help people. So thank you so much.